Beneath order and invite everyone to rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United
States of America,
to the republic
which
stands
stands
one nation under God, indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all.
Amen. Hallelujah. Okay, start with the agenda approval. Are there any additions or changes from staff?
No.
Any changes from council requests?
No.
Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved, Dejewski.
Second, Anderson.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Commission representatives, the ones that are on the list are Dean Jacobs and Phil Christensen. Are they present? I don't see them, so I don't know who's.
Mayor,
Okay.
they are not on the call yet, but
Okay.
they may
well,
be still joining us.
If they join us, we'll recognize it, I guess. Okay, we start out with open forum, which at this point in time, if anyone wishes to join open forum, press *9 on your phone, and Jessica will recognize you and put you on.
Mayor, at this time, it doesn't look like I have any hands raised, but if you'd like, we could wait just another moment.
We'll give it another second. Anyone who wishes to speak at open forum, press *9, and Jessica will put you on.
It looks like Phil joined us, and everyone else is either one of a council, staff, or consultant. So
Okay.
that's everyone on. So I think we're good.
Okay, hearing no open forum candidates, we'll move on to, we have no presentations or recognitions. Consent agenda. Does anyone wish to pull any of the items from consent agenda, item 7A, B, or C?
Do we have to close the open forum?
No,
No,
we
it's-
don't. It's
Okay.
not a,
Fair enough. Okay.
if we do, we've been doing it wrong for 20 years, so, or quite some time. But yeah, we don't. Anyone wish to pull anything from the consent agenda?
We've got two minor issues for A and B.
So A and B, okay. How about C? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve consent agenda item 7C as presented.
So move, Schultz.
Second, Anderson.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski, and Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, 7A, what,
The item is on page 4. And that's about the absentee voting discussion that we had.
mhm.
It's listed as motion carried 5-0, and I had voted against that.
I thought that was the case as well.
Thank
So
you.
that just needs to be changed.
Thank you, Councilmember Dejewski. We'll make sure that gets updated. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
Was there anything else, Brian?
Not for that, no.
Okay. I entertain a motion then to approve consent agenda item 7A with the modification.
So moved.
So moved, Anderson. Second, Anderson.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor,
Okay,
can we clarify who made the motion on that one?
I did.
Thank you.
Brian.
Thank you.
Dejewski. Okay, item 7B, the financial claims.
The two questions I had, one is for Matt, and the other, I'm not sure who will answer that one. And I apologize if I asked you this already, Matt. Under the citywide services, that DWI forfeiture towing impound fees.
Yes.
I can't remember, are those reimbursed to us in some way? Are these just fees to have us impound the cars and we lose that? I can't remember.
Sure. So generally when we tow a vehicle, the owner ends up paying the tow bill when they get the vehicle from the lot. However, when the vehicle is forfeited, as is the case in this one, the city is responsible for paying the towing bill since the city becomes the owner of the vehicle to retrieve it. So that vehicle ended up going to auction, and then we typically will pay for those fees. I believe the fund, it should be coded to the forfeiture fund. So if there's revenue from the sale of the forfeited vehicle, that's what we would use to pay for the towing fees of the forfeited vehicles.
I got it. So there was 3 of them for this one? So
That sounds right.
Okay, all right. So thank you for clarifying that. I had just forgotten that. The other thing that I noticed, Brad, is on the West Metro or Metro West inspection stuff. I'm sure this is stupid, but I just noticed this, and I don't know if you want it to read like this or not. But if you look at their actual sheet, the inspection sheet, which is 21 in the packet of the PDF, I think it's 21 or 22, something like that. So we've got finalized permits for 1 hour at a rate of $29,947 an hour. I don't know if you want that to be that way, but this is what I noticed and thought I'd bring it up.
I'll do that from now on for the city if that's
Yeah.
available.
I'll send an application as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's obviously for the entire month. Yes, that does not read appropriately. I will work on making that change. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, the system probably needs a reference there, but maybe a better one would be, or a note. Yeah, good catch, Brian. I think
I
it's
just know people, they look through this stuff and
yeah.
that would be something that would come to flag somebody. So that's all I've got.
You never know. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve consent agenda item 7B, which is the financial claims.
I think,
So moved, Anderson.
Second, Schultz.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye. Schultz,
Aye.
Dajewski. Was that an
I
aye?
said aye. Yep.
Okay. Bottom
Aye.
and Anderson.
Aye.
Thank you.
and Mayor, if we could get an aye from you as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Thomas, aye.
Thank you.
Or a
Let's
nay.
Oh. Thank you.
I was getting cute with the order of things and dropped myself off. Okay, on to item 8A, which is the under planning business, well, public comment opportunity. So anyone who wishes to speak on the item 8A, which is a park dedication fee update, please signify by pressing *9 on your phone, and Jessica will put you on.
Mayor, we do have a couple folks on the line, but they have not raised their hand at this time.
Okay.
We can wait another moment if you'd like.
Okay, again, anyone wishing to speak at this time, *9 will get you on. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. So item 8A, which is a park dedication fee update. So I assume Brad's going to give us a.
Correct, Mayor and Council. Jessica's going to work on getting the PowerPoint up there. I'm going to play Kendra tonight just because it was a small item and I figured I could give her the night off. But essentially, this is an update to the park dedication ordinance based upon this pretty significant review that took place and because of the comprehensive plan. So as mentioned here on the slide, the Parks and Trails Commission reviewed this at their May meeting. The Planning Commission had to hold the public hearing. They did that at their June meeting and voted 5-0 to recommend approval. And it really just follows statute on how we institute park dedication fees based upon the comprehensive plan. We did a pretty significant update in 2016. But then with the comp plan, it required a bit larger update. And annually, we actually work with the city assessor to adjust this fee based upon annual evaluations. Next slide, Jess. So as far as the updates, again, this is much more significant than ever before. So we actually picked a time frame through 2040 and picked out which parks we believe would be developed by that time. So there's some open space parks such as Ravinia, the Bellwether Open Space Park, one additional open space park potentially, and then neighborhood parks as well. So we had the Bellwether Neighborhood Park and two others, I believe, in the plan. And then we also added some other items such as an overpass or underpass. Those costs were never involved, and we know there's going to be a couple at some point in Corcoran, specifically with the town center, of course. And then there's increased land values. So this is a very specific update that I think is incredibly defendable. It does result in some decent sized changes, however, in the values as you see here. So with the current park dedication, we're at $30,970. We're looking up to $4,600 for single family, and then multifamily jumping from about $2,700 to $3,140. And again, this is based on population. So we figured that the users of the park system are 95% residential users, 5% commercial industrial users. So really what that fee represents there for commercial industrial is really a per acre fee. But later on tonight, I actually will add this to the fee schedule. We're not incorporating that number for commercial industrial with the fee schedule. It's really formulaic in the ordinance. So we're really focusing most on the single family and multifamily at this point. Next slide. So again, it's based upon the subdivision ordinance. We did change land dedication percentage as mentioned below and found a typographical error there. So really this is just a chart from the ordinance itself. Next slide, please. So we have is 3 items. We have an ordinance amending the subdivision. We have a resolution for the finding of facts, and then a summary ordinance for the publication. And if someone could either move these individually or together, I'm happy to answer questions. Again, later on, we actually have fee schedule amendment, and I did not include these fees. I will be asking to add those later on the agenda for adoption of those fees. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
So any questions?
Actually, I have a question. On the second chart, land dedication requirements, could you talk about that last column, one more forward, the next one? There you go, that's one. That percentage of land, I stared at that for a good bit.
So this is really just what, I'm gonna do a poor job at this. And Kendra walked me through this, so I apologize. I might have to follow up on this. It's per the ordinance, really, and the more density you have, the more land percentage, which could be cash in lieu, is required. Because if you have a really, say a 5-story apartment complex, although it's, narrower than say 50 homes, it's a lot more people than 50 homes. So we feel a larger percent of the area should be kept really land area for public recreation. So really protecting certain areas. Now, that also can be cash in lieu. So again, you'll have a higher cash contribution, but there's more people than there would be as a single family development, if that makes sense.
So that if in the case of a mixed residential, if we had a park in that area on our master park plan, we could require up to 28% of that land be dedicated for a park.
Well, and this is where it gets confusing.
Okay.
Because this is if they're doing a land dedication versus fee.
Yes.
So you kind of can choose one of these, and usually it's a both thing. So it's a little bit of land and cash, but this is the formula or the chart that pumps out that number. And I'm probably going to have to get back to you on this question. I apologize.
I think we would never be able to get more than 28% of the land for a park, and a developer coming in and hoping to do a mixed residential area would certainly want to negotiate that down, and the Parks and Trails Commission would look at doing part of a park on that mixed residential unit, and then pick up the rest at the next development nearby, or some such arrangement. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, there has to be a nexus between the dollars we charge and the land amount, because we can do either one. So,
Either one.
yeah. So that's what this
Okay.
brings those into correlation,
Okay.
I guess. So.
Good. Okay, I've got it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, discussions?
Yeah, Brad, do you have any reference to the numbers that contribute to this? Seems like an awful lot. It seems like a large increase to me. And the biggest item you mentioned was the underpasses and overpasses. What I remember is when we were talking with Three Rivers Park, that there's a potential that they could cover the cost of that as a result of us working with them to have that Three Rivers Trail come through. So if that happened and we were using that to justify these increases, doesn't that put the city at some kind of risk to say that this was unnecessary?
Potentially, yes. If we didn't update our fees, yes. Now, at least with every comp plan, we'll be updating these with what's included with what we're going to build. But also, we do this annually, at least based upon land value. So if something significant happened, we would do that. Similarly with our trunk fees every year for water and sewer. So say a developer comes in and builds a chunk of our trunk system. And that's really the same nexus as this, right? We have an overall trunk system divided by the acres, there is your fee. And so if a developer comes in, we look at that and factor that project out of the future cost and redo the trunk fees. So yes, we would need to update these consistently. And I can send you all the background spreadsheet that was used to come up with these numbers. It does sound like a lot, but then if you look at the individual parks, for example, it just adds up quite quickly. For example, we have 2 phases of City Park included in this. We believe it's a 3-phase build to build out the entire project. So we believe that phase 1 and phase 2 will be constructed of City Park by 2040. So that's, over $1 million for sure. Then those open space parks aren't that expensive, but even a neighborhood park, I want to say, is around $350,000, $400,000 for a neighborhood park to be constructed. So I can follow up with those details if you want, but I think they're vetted extremely well.
So let's say in 10 years, Three Rivers, because that's what we were kind of targeting for Three Rivers to have that park, right? And they decide we're going to cover that overpass or underpass that we're going to use. So for the last 10 years, we've been charging fees at this rate, anticipating that cost. Now that cost goes away, and could not someone say, well, those 10 years of fees were unnecessary at that level?
Well, specifically related to the overpass, the current fee that we have had no overpasses or underpasses in whatsoever. So that was never included until what we're proposing today. But and specifically regarding that trail, until it's an actual something that happened, we kind of have to play that way. But I guess somebody could say that.
I mean, the operative is we have to deal with the facts on the ground right now, and that's and that we can't say, gee, these folks may come in and do this, therefore we don't charge the fees, because then we don't capture them when we need to. So I don't see an option. I think your question, Brian, is probably more of a legal thing, is what happens if they do come in? What do we have to do at that point in time to make sure we're not open to some kind of challenges?
Right, it's about exposure. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
And I think when the facts on the ground change, I think is a little bit what Brad was saying. At that point in time, we have to take a look at it and see what actions we're taking and make sure they're appropriate.
Okay.
The one thing I will say is my sense is even the fees that we have in here are woefully under. When we actually get into doing things, it actually is much more. For example, I have any of the town square park is $836,000. The one that is being built in St. Michael, I think, is $3 million.
Yeah.
So if anything, I think they're conservative.
Yeah, I think certainly our single family residential fee of $4,000 roughly is fairly low. I think it's very competitive for the rest of the world. And it seems to me, I don't know what you folks, if you remember what you paid when you built in Corcoran, but back 29 years ago, I think I paid more than that. I'm not sure, but it was at least 4,000. So, which isn't the point here. I think, Brian, your point is still well made. I think that we have to make sure that we're on top of it.
All I had.
Okay. Anything else? Any other observations, questions, clarifications? Okay, here none, I entertain a motion to approve ordinance 2020-405, which amends section 955.020 of the subdivision ordinance.
So moved, Anderson.
Second, Schultz.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain a motion to approve resolution 2020-43, which is approving the finding of facts for the ordinance amendment.
So moved.
Second, Dejewski.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, and then I'll entertain a motion to approve resolution 2000, to approve the summary ordinance 2020-46 for publication.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second, Anderson.
Was that Dejewski on the move motion?
Schultz.
Oh, Schultz, Anderson, okay. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Brad. Okay, on to unfinished business. Item 9A, which is awarding the sale of general obligation bonds series 2020A.
And Mayor, we do have a public comment opportunity at this point
Whoops.
too.
Okay, it
If
wasn't on
people
mine.
those want to dial *9.
Okay. Okay, back up. At this point in time, we'll take public comment on unfinished business consisting of items 9A, which is the sale of general obligation bonds and the Hackamore Road Improvement Plan. If you'd wish to speak, press *9 on your phone and Jessica will put you on.
Mayor, at this time, we do not have anyone who's raising their hand. We'll wait just another moment.
Okay.
We still
Okay,
do not have anyone.
Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on. At this point in time, we'll go to item 9A now, which is awarding the sale of general obligation bonds.
The Mayor and Council, I'm actually going to introduce Tammy Amdel of Northland Securities, who's going to walk through the details of the sale that took place this morning. So Tammy.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. As the council may recall, you approved calling for the sale of originally an amount of $2.3 million to finance equipment purchases, a water improvement project, and to pay the costs associated with the issuance of the bonds. Just a brief summary, the equipment portion is over 9 years, and the balance of it is over 10 years. The pledge on these bonds for security is the revenue from the water utility and property taxes, ad valorem property taxes. The sale went extremely well. Great timing with respect to not only our rates at historic lows, rates were at very historic lows today in the marketplace. You received 5 bids. The low bid was United Bankers Bank locally here in Bloomington, Minnesota. The bonds were rated since I was last before you or spoke of the sale that we recommended a rating, and Brad and I went through that process, and Moody's affirmed the AA3. Before I get into the sales result, I would say that based upon my discussion with Moody's, and if you had a chance to read the rating report, the city's financial results, even inclusive of the city's comments on impact of COVID. I think there's a lot of positive pressure as far as the city's rating. Moody's and Standard & Poor's are not doing upgrades in this environment, so you did not receive an upgrade, but I just note that the strength of the city's finances is very strong and so noted by Moody's. So with that, the true interest cost of those 5 bids received is 0.83%. What that means is your total debt service, based upon what we had estimated on current rates when you set the sale to that, is that the city will pay nearly $180,000 less in debt service payments than you otherwise would have. So 0.83%. You may have had a chance, and because the sale was this morning, so you just would have received this information today, this evening, is that the cover bid from Hilltop, and true interest cost is a rate that we use to compare when bonds are bid, was at 1.06, and the highest bid of the 5, Stiefel, was at 1.15, so fairly tight there. With that, Mayor, Council, again, from a cost perspective, very positive results for the city, and you sold bonds on a date that it was ideal. With that, Mayor, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have questions for Tammy?
I just have one. Can I ask? Mr. Mayor, can I have the floor, please?
Go ahead.
Tammy, do you know what rate is on our current bonds that are able to be called in October?
I can look that up. I don't right in front of me, council member, but we have that, so I can either look that up while you wait, or I can provide that to Brad to respond.
Either way, it's just something to think about. If this rate environment stays as low as it is, it may be in the town's interest to refinance some of the debt that we already have, just to save, gosh, 1.5%, maybe. I'm not sure, but it's pretty historic where we're at today. So good job, Tammy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, timing's everything, council member. Mayor, council, in response to that question, I will give Brad a summary. Certainly not all of your debt is callable, but we can also show you that on a taxable basis and how close it is to calling. So I will provide that to Brad so that he can share with the council. I just don't have it open in front of me at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, John, and I think it'd be worthwhile to just take a look at if there is a worthwhile plan to do something. We should get a picture of that and think about it, because this is unbelievably low. I'm waiting for us to go to negative interest rates where they pay us to take their money.
You'd have to go to Europe.
Yeah, well, maybe here someday too, John. Never know. But
yeah.
Let's settle for what we got. Okay, any other questions for Tammy? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve resolution 2020-44, which is the awarding the sale of general obligation bonds series 2020A.
So moved, Anderson.
Second, Dejewski.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Bodema,
Aye.
Dejewski,
Aye.
Schultz. Alan, are you there?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thanks, Tammy. Great job on that for the whole team.
Good evening,
Great
council.
job
Thank you.
historically setting that up too. It's been, you guys have put a lot of work into getting this position where we're at. Okay, item 9B, which is the Hackamore Road Improvements 30% design review.
Mayor, I'm going to turn this over to Kevin, who will then turn it over to WSB after that.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll be real brief here and then let the project manager from WSV, Jim Strimmel, go through the presentation this evening. Back in February of this year, we entered into an agreement with Medina to evaluate the Hackamore Road corridor from essentially the intersection of Hackamore and 101 and all the way to west, the westerly side of Hackamore and County Road 116. Throughout the process, we did engage the public. We held a virtual open house on May 19th that Jim will elaborate on, and we did evaluate 3 designs, and they are going to be presented here shortly. So with that, we'll be available after Jim's presentation to go through any details, but I will turn it over to him now.
Well, great. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to present our 30% design here for the Hackamore Road Reconstruction Project. We've spent a number of months here, as Kevin alluded to, preparing this and getting things ready and looking at a number of different issues and things along this corridor. I can say that it feels like ages ago since we started this project, considering where we are now with our world and our current new normal. But here we are and doing things a little bit differently than we would have thought here a few months ago. Jessica's running the slide here, so I'll just ask her to move the next one. So I'll start off with some project information here. As Kevin also alluded here, the project location starts at Medina Lake Road to the west, across 116 to the east there, and then over to 101, and then just that westbound approach to 101 is essentially the project corridor that we're asked to look at. Next slide. So a few background things. This is a joint project with both the cities of Corcoran and Medina. The idea here was to develop a cohesive plan through this corridor to help guide the cities for a lot of their planning efforts here. Of course, we want to address some of the deteriorating pavement and other infrastructure that is visible in the corridor, whether that's pavements, could be drainage, it could also be some culverts and other things, including the intersections that abut the roadway here. We're also looking at improving some of the existing access points, like those intersections or other streets that do connect with Hackamore Road. We also want to look at how we can accommodate future development. There are a number of developments here that have not quite proceeded or are not complete. On the south side in Medina, we've got the reserve near Hackamore Circle there. And on the north side, Corcoran, you all have a number of developments, especially around 116 there, that have not really proceeded into construction. And so we're looking at that and trying to find ways to accommodate those access points. And then with the design, we also want to identify what there may be for right-of-way needs. It's going to also help plan some efforts here as things move forward. And of course, we also want to look at improving the pedestrian mobility throughout the corridor as well. Next slide. So to date, with the project progress, this is essentially the end of the 30% design phase. With this design, we've done a number of things here, including traffic forecasting and operations analysis. We've looked at we looked at a number of different design alternatives that really came to 2 here that we'll discuss in more detail in further slides. We also looked at some project phasing considerations for construction, largely driven by needs initially on the east half and then development potentially on the westerly half. We did some public stakeholder engagement and some coordination efforts with some of the other agencies involved. We also looked at a fairly detailed cost estimate for both of the options, which we'll look at here in a few slides from now. And then we talked to the city staff here and kind of came up with some recommendations for the city council to consider. Next slide. So I just wanted to show a few pictures of the existing conditions here. Didn't want to inundate you with a bunch of pictures, but this will kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at, those who may not know. The first picture on the left there is looking west towards County Road 116. You can see, of course, the pavement failures there. And if you look into the picture a little further, you'll see there isn't really much for intersection controls for the Hackamore side of that, turn lanes and so forth. The middle picture is looking west again. On the right-hand side, you'll see the Ravinia development there, which has been underway for a number of years. And on the right-hand picture is looking east towards County Road 101. A little different scenario here. We've got a little bit of an urban section as opposed to the rural on the other two pictures. See some existing bituminous curb and some other more urban attributes there. One thing to note on these pictures too are the existing power poles and some of the utilities that you can see, utility boxes and so forth. But it's certainly something that we're looking at through this design, and I think we'll really refine that more so as we get further along the project. But that's certainly going to be an impact with the proposed improvements. Next slide. So one of the more detailed items that we performed here with this portion of the project is the traffic operations analysis. We did some traffic projections. We actually did some traffic counts in the field here this spring, actually before the pandemic hit. We caught it just like a couple weeks before that. So we were able to capture really generally full traffic before things quieted down for the number of those months. We came up with a number of the AM peak hour volumes and really did an analysis of the turning movements throughout the corridor. On the right-hand side, you'll see an image there of one of the examples of what that looks like, that turning movement analysis at the intersection. In the full report, you probably noticed that there are a number of those for some of the critical intersections throughout the corridor, and that helps us guide some of the evaluation and recommendations as far as how to deal with those intersections, whether we're adding turn lanes, one direction, both directions, rights, lefts, and that kind of thing. And then later on, we'll just look at a comparison between options 1 and 2 here. Next slide. So the proposed improvements are kind of outlined here. Generally, the road will be widened through most of the corridor. And early on, the city's worked on an evaluation of where they thought a trail could go. And based on some of the wetland impacts, potential right-of-way impacts, and the potential for some flexibility with future development on the Corcoran side, staff thought that the trail would be best fit on the north side somehow. And in both the options, the trail it's situated in a couple different ways. I'll get to that in a second here, but the initial option here has a center turn lane. So it's a 3-lane east and westbound, and then there's a center left turn lane through the whole corridor. The second option obviously has both east and west through lanes, but then it has more dedicated turn lanes where we really tried to minimize the width and some of the impacts to some of the road widening there. And so we use that turn lane analysis that I mentioned before to really hone in on just those intersections where we felt like turn lanes were absolutely necessary. In general, we're proposing here to construct it with a rural section, although depending on which trail options are selected, there may need to be some curb to minimize impacts to slopes, properties, wetlands, and so forth. And then with the intersections at the county roads 116 and 101, there would likely be curb in and around those intersections, in part because, especially on the west side there with County Road 116, there are a number of wetlands. And we're also trying to accommodate pedestrian crossing and so forth, and it's much easier to do that with curbs and curb ramps and so forth. We did look at, yep. Well, one second, I'll go finish up that previous slide there. So we talked a little bit about the trail. On option 1, the trail tends to be a little more meandering. It has some separation from the roadway in consideration of maybe how it would look through a future development, which could be constructed at a different time. Option 2, the trail, again, that option is really trying to restrict the width of the roadway, and so that trail is closer to the roadway. Maybe there's some additional curb to keep it even closer, and so that particular option would consider what the trail might look like if you constructed it completely with the project at that time. We talked about the signal improvements potentially at County Road 116 and 101 to add turn lanes on the Hackamore portions of it. At County Road 116 on the north and south sides, we'd be looking at right-hand turn lanes. And then we also did analysis of some of the stormwater management needs and improvements through the corridor, and then looked at some of the wetland impacts. And so the next number of slides here are some of the more detailed maps. You can go to the next slide. Go ahead to the next slide. So some of the more detailed maps here, I'll just kind of go through some of what the colors mean. The yellow obviously is the roadway. The green portions are, might be a turfed boulevard or maybe a swale between the road and then what would be the trail in gray. Over top of the, some of the edges there, you'll see a kind of a bluish, light blue hatch, and that's some areas where right away may be needed to accommodate those improvements as shown. We also have some stormwater ponding locations, or what we call best management practices, BMPs. In some cases, they are just sized for what the stormwater we would need to treat the roadway. In this particular example here, that stormwater pond could be incorporated with the adjacent development. But this just shows what size we would need to accommodate the drainage from Hackamore, not necessarily development as well. So on the north side, you'll see the trail does stay a little further away from the roadway, a little more boulevard there. An example here of how the lanes are a little bit differing. If you look just east of the Medina Lake Drive, you'll see some of the difference in turn lane configurations there, where we've got the left turn lane through the whole section there. And then on the option 2 on the bottom, got a little bit different striping. Although the width of the roadway there doesn't change too much because of the approach and transitions to each of the intersections and turn lanes and so forth. In this case, the turn lanes for these intersections are similar. Next slide.
Could I ask a question on that?
Yes.
So in the 2 examples, you said there's sections that the roadways are a similar width, right? In those pictures?
Yes.
So why then is in like the top image, why is there a wider turf boulevard between the roadway and the trail if the roadway is actually the same width?
On the first option, the option 1 on top, we wanted to take a look to see what that might look like if we had a wider boulevard. Maybe provide a little different vision for the corridor if the trail was further away from the road. In that particular exhibit, if you just want to maybe flip up 1 slide. Yep. So to the north here is actually one of the future developments here. I believe the city received a plan for that here a few weeks ago. It's the Wessel property. And so there might be an opportunity to keep that trail further away from the roadway because of ability to work with the developer and maybe share some right away and some costs that might be associated with that. So we tried to show that a little bit differently in option 1 where we had a little wider boulevard.
So, okay, so it's emphasizing the additional amount of easement that would have to be purchased. The roadway is the same, it's just the fact that the more easement would have to be taken to push that boulevard out.
That's correct.
At additional cost, okay.
Next slide.
Thank
and I'll
you.
show you some spots too where the road actually does change a bit there. These few slides, the roadways are actually fairly similar, but because of the turn lane analysis we did and the need for turn lanes at some of these intersections. So you'll see on the left-hand side, there's County Road 116, and I had alluded earlier to improving that actually on County Road 116 as well by adding north and southbound right turn lanes. Currently, there are left turn lanes there, but no right turn lanes. And then moving further east, again, you'll see another stormwater pond. And here's another example of where the trail on the option 1 on the top there could actually go around the outside of that wetland. There's a wetland there. It's kind of hard to see, but on the bottom option, we'd have to get some additional wetland. There would be some additional wetland impacts there. And on the top one, we'd be able to avoid some of that with the roadway there, although it's fairly similar. As we are on the bottom, we actually shifted the road just south just a little bit to accommodate that a little bit. And then a little further east where we have a future development access. We're not sure exactly where that might be, but that's one of those things where we're trying to accommodate what could be a future development there on what is considered, I guess, the Gagne property. And going further east is where you'll start to see a transition to a narrower roadway. On the bottom, option 2, you can see where we're actually able to narrow that roadway down. On the option on the top, you'll see the roadway is full width because of the center left turn lane. And again, some additional stormwater management areas there that we'd like to consider. as well. And going further east, you'll see on the bottom again how that roadway was able to be narrowed. And that's a fairly lengthy section there where we're able to do that. On the top, there might be some additional impacts there with some of the landscaping and things that exist on some of those properties potentially. And then we get to Hunter Road, and that there again, we are essentially matching the two designs, primarily because the turn lane analysis told us that those turn lanes would be necessary to accommodate the traffic there. And then on that south side, that next access there is for the reserve development, which has gone through a couple phases now, but the third phase, which includes this piece to the north, is not really proceeded beyond some rough grading and things a number of years ago. This is the current platted access there. It's possible that depending how things go and when they develop, might be some opportunities for them to purchase property and maybe move that access so it aligns with Hunter Road. But at this point, that's not possible. And so we've shown it here as a separate access where it's been platted. So we can continue to go further east here and get to the Steeplechase and Bergamot Road here. This is another spot where we have the ability to narrow the roadway on option 2 on the bottom. You can see that we lose that center turn lane. And so that does help minimize some of the impacts there. And you can see there are some ponds on the north side and then a wetland on the south side. So that does help us alleviate some of those issues. And again, you'll see another stormwater pond here further to the east. So we get through that area. Next slide. And the last slide here. So another one where we kind of push that trail further to the north on that upper example there. The city of Corcoran has received an application for the Eagle Brook Church here on the northwest quadrant there of 101. And so, there might be an opportunity there to work with the church and find a way to share that trail and some right of way and so forth. If not, then we would squeeze that towards the roadway as we've shown in the lower option, which actually might require a retaining wall potentially if we were not allowed to grade up further to the north. And so there's some differences there that we looked at potentially with some of those trail alignments and other things there associated with that. Now, east of 101, really that's no different in each of the options. That particular design came about from the County Road 47 corridor study that the city of Plymouth is working on with Hennepin County. And so we did essentially use their design that they had there. And actually their design goes much further to the east through the whole corridor. We cut it off here where we thought it was about the location where we need to transition back into that existing roadway. The schedule for that roadway is quite a ways out. And so this design here might actually look like more like an ultimate condition. We'll work with those agencies here to figure out what would be a reasonable interim design, you might say, where we may not necessarily have trails on both sides and things like that. And so that's something we'll have to work through at this point. So that kind of concludes the kind of the detailed design review. Next slide.
Jim, before you go on, could I ask you a question, please? If you could go up one slide from where you were. Yeah. So if Eagle Brook Church is going to be right here, these traffic numbers, especially for narrowing the roadway in this section, is somewhat concerning to me. If you've got such a large church exiting, some 800, 900 vehicles every Sunday, quite a few of them are going to be going to the west, I would think. And then immediately they're going to face a restricted roadway, correct?
So thank you, council member. So we actually were able to incorporate and use, some projected traffic data for a church with, the number of parking spaces that they were proposing. And so what they are proposing is 2 access points on Hackamore. One would be dedicated exit and one would be a dedicated entrance. And so in this particular picture, you'll see on the bottom, there's those 2 arrows that are pointing towards Hackamore. So this would be their dedicated exit. And so they wouldn't need additional turn lanes, like say left-hand turn lanes that you would see up on the upper exhibit there. And so from beyond that, the turn lanes and, or excuse me, the lanes, through lanes shown here in both examples would really accommodate that traffic just fine. I don't know if they would see any restriction as far as their ability to move in and out of that site. Now, if you want to go to the next slide down, this one shows the entrance. So here we do need to add turn lanes for them because, like you said, they will have a lot of vehicles entering and exiting during their service times. One of the, I guess, benefits of a church is that a lot of times their services are on days in which there aren't, may not be a lot of other traffic too. Not dealing with a rush hour on, say, like a Sunday when they might have services, or a Saturday night. Sometimes churches do have stuff going on, say, like a Wednesday evening. So that might be a time in which there might be some overlap in traffic from, let's say, like a rush hour or peak time to when you have people going in and out of that site. But I think those times outside of the weekend may not be quite as busy for that church as you might see on an actual service night. But we did incorporate that with our turn lane analysis. So,
thank you.
Jim, I will just real quickly add that our feasibility study that we did with Eagle Brook has been incorporated with this design, and they are consistent and match. So we are pairing those kind of parallel processes together.
I have, I guess, a bit of a maybe political question, but we're being presented this. Staff from both cities have recommended option 2. Where's Medina at as far as their process of approval?
so their meeting will be is next week, and so I just prepared their the items for their council packet here yesterday, and they were due this morning. So they'll see a very similar presentation and report and so forth, and the recommendations are the same for that council as well.
Mm-hmm. And the follow-on to that type of a question is and I noticed in the public comments from people that there's a concern to some of the residents as well, is the trail is on the north side, impacting Corcoran residents exclusively. A couple of questions there is, what's the quid pro quo that Corcoran's getting for that discomfort for our citizens, and basically how is Corcoran being compensated? As an example, for the Eagle Brook Church, I assume we'll get that right away from Eagle Brook because they have a development in it. They happen to have a development in it during this time, and we'll take it and probably use that as for the trail, it'd be park dedication fees. How's that tracked, and how are we coming out on that in order to be considered to be treated fairly?
Here, I can try to take that one. It's extremely difficult, the
Yeah.
conversation, and even with the developers too. So for example, we're walking through this process for a pretty substantial roadway improvement, and if no developers came in, potentially, we would do this project and they would have no cost in the game because we don't have street impact fees allowed for us. Now,
Yep.
we likely wouldn't do this project if we didn't have development taking place. So similarly, when a developer comes in, Kevin and his team does a feasibility study and says, but if you have to come in, these improvements are required. So for example, go with Eagle Brook. If just Eagle Brook would have came in, well, they are, I guess, but we also have Linares funds, so it's kind of a hybrid there. They would have had to make all these improvements on their own. So the eastbound, for example, those full turn lanes, everything at their own dime, and no cost would have come from Medina. So it's a developer-driven cost that really would have helped both cities. That's going to continue. I guess in our mind at the staff level, we're focusing on but for these projects, what improvements have to take place. And ultimately, if that helps Medina out, that's a potential. And I think it's still the right way to deal with it because the data show that these improvements are necessary. So yeah, there's a potential, I would say, that Corcoran developers pay more than Medina developers, absolutely. But our biggest goal is to have development pay its own way and to not impact the taxpayers of Corcoran is our main goal. So there's as little general dollars as possible for this project. So if that makes sense, that's how we're balancing that.
And I guess that's because of the way we have to finance our roads. That's all we can do. And this would be a case study for our I won't use that expletive deleted, but for our legislature to be looking at this and see why we need to have a way to fund these kinds of projects that makes sense. And I would think the developers who want to hit us for all the fees we charge would be on top of this as well and get behind it, and they don't seem to be. But the other part, having said all that, I think we could still be looking at why the trail on the north side, and I think you can, okay, seemed like every time we do something, when they're looking at expanding Highway 55 between 116 and 19, where it hits the city of Corcoran, all the expansion is taken on the Corcoran side. And that's a historic thing. It has nothing to do with this, I get that. But it does, a lot of citizens see that kind of stuff, and it seems like it's always coming out of Corcoran's skin. So
yeah, and maybe Kevin can shine some light on that, but essentially again came down to really what's the best and a streamlined way to do that. We have very limited numbers of impacts for the potential of having to acquire additional right-of-way, for example. Along the Medina side, there'd be kind of the whole way along having to acquire right-of-way. Here we have we'll call it the Eagle Brook corner, all of Lennar, you have a chunk of Hunter, and then you're over to Gagne. And it's an opportunity to really take that for potentially no cost. So the benefit to both cities is a lower cost project, and ideally a better trail that maybe can be a little bit off the roadway as much as possible. Again, way at the staff level, we focus on design more than politics. We also look at where the crossings would come from, and we would have, for our standpoint for Corcoran, we think it's better for our residents because you think of all the development potential on the north side, they would all have to cross Hackamore to use that trail. So, there's a lot of components going into it, and Kevin, maybe you can chime in on what I missed.
And I guess I'm not trying to question the technical and the the financial reason for putting the trail on the north side. I take your word for it that that's the best place to put it. My point is that it being there, okay, we're providing the right of way at no expense because we're taking it from developers who are coming into Corcoran, and so why wouldn't we ask Medina to give us some equivalent help in some way, shape, or form to help make up for that, or to at least compensate us for that?
Yeah, and maybe I'll take a time out here, and we're not there yet is the short answer. We're working on design, and then there's the next step would be an agreement about who pays for what.
Okay, well, maybe that's my point then. This is a heads up that we should be looking at that.
That's fair.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, I will just jump in real quick. I apologize. I have one thing that might help this is today, we really only have a commitment to date through the 30% design with an agreement to split the cost 50-50 to go to 75% design. So we are, like Brad said, we're not to that point yet. And the trail does have the most flexibility. So what we're looking for tonight is comments on kind of the vision, right? How can we get the best pedestrian mobility through that corridor? What is the best? And we can tweak off of that. So it's really vision. It's going to depend on opportunities with development and whatnot. There'll be opportunities to factor that in, and same with stormwater. The stormwater is more on the north side. At a staff level, we understand that that's value, so we can express that tonight. And then really the goal tonight is really to focus on the design, because having a ultimate design is necessary before we could ever have a conversation about an agreement or a financial package. And it also helps us with developers coming in as well. So the folks that own land in Corcoran, having some of these decisions made and in place as far as a vision and planning is very helpful to them. For instance, the feasibility study is less expensive because we know what the corridor is going to look like. And with that, I'll step back and let Jim or you guys continue your conversation.
And I guess my follow-up then would be that's helpful information, and I get it. I guess I just think it's something that stands out to me, and obviously has stood out to a lot of the residents who are along there. The other question I guess I'm curious about is, it's about a $500,000 difference between project 1 and project 2. $500,000 is not a trivial amount of money, but if thought I read into it that Project 2 would preclude a lot of need for future access problems, or would alleviate some of that. Is it, are we being a little bit penny rich, pound foolish by not having the expanded right away or expanded turn lanes all along, and potentially causing people to have to do shoehorn them in later? Or is that not the case, or is it?
Mayor, I think I might be able to answer that. It's Jim Stremel here. So maybe go to the next slide really quick, and we'll talk about the phasing a little bit, and that might help answer that question. So with the project here, we are proposing to phase it potentially, and the yellow on the right-hand side is kind of that easterly half. That half, with the exception of the church property there, is pretty much fully developed. And so the timing of that property coming in for development review actually is it's timely, because we were able the city's able to work with them and figure out if some of these opportunities to utilize their property and share in some of those costs. Now on the western pieces, we've got 2 phases shown, and you know, maybe it ends up being 1 phase or whatever, but you know, this will be more development driven. And so
Okay.
when we talk about that, it gives us a little time to figure out if maybe this westerly piece might be better with the 3-lane, because you could go with the 3-lane for the western half, and if you wanted to go with the 2-lane option 2 on the easterly half, that's an option too. So in the subsequent years here, there'll be some flexibility to look at what's been developed and when, and incorporate that into the plan. So so initially that east half, it's possible to construct as early as 2021. And then we're just kind of guessing here on the westerly phases, maybe as early as 2022, but you know, it could be a number of years after that, depending on how the development proceeds.
Okay, yeah, that's thankful. That's helpful. Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Okay, I'll shut up now and let other council members weigh in.
Well, I can keep going on the presentation if you'd like, and then we could come back to questions too. Let's go to the next slide here.
Okay.
We'll talk a little bit about the coordination efforts that we went through with the project. And you know, initially, when we put this together, we thought we were going to be in a room together when we did these neighborhood meetings and see people face to face and do some things like that. But of course, that changed fairly quickly, and so we did kind of modify our approach. And so I'm going to go next slide first. So what we did was we ended up doing kind of 2 activities. We did a social pinpoint online mapping activity. I don't know if any of the council members or staff were able to go on there and take a look at that. And essentially what we did was we were able to overlay both of those options on top of each other, and you could kind of toggle through between the 2 options and really get an idea of what the existing area looked like with the aerial, and then you could toggle on both options and kind of on and off to see how that might change and might look, and could impact the vision of the corridor and so forth. And then folks are able to put their comments right on the website, and then even some were able to be responded to and so forth, or there were thumbs up and thumbs down and some different ways to really engage and put your thoughts down on paper. And then we also did a virtual open house, so you may have attended that, where we did a presentation much like this one and just kind of went through, and then we did you know, a question and answer period at the end. And we did have some folks that did talk specifically about some drainage issues that we are looking into, and we'll, you know, look into further as we get into this project even more. Those are mainly on the phases 2 and 3, so potentially future phases that we might look at for construct at a later date. But let's go to the next slide up, or the previous slide. Some of the other stakeholder engagement efforts we did was we talked to the Hennepin County about the intersections at County Road 116 and 101. We actually met with Maple Grove and Plymouth at the same time. Currently, you know, County Road 47 is a county roadway, but there's some discussion, and the reason why they did their corridor study was possibility of that getting turned back to the cities of Plymouth and Maple Grove. Maple Grove is on the northeast quadrant over there on 101, and Plymouth is on the southeast quadrant there. So kind of give you an idea of multiple cities we're working with there as well. We did meet with the watershed district to talk about some of the stormwater management, and even the ability to offset some of the different areas of stormwater management, so that you know, we wouldn't necessarily have to have a treatment area every part of the project. We can kind of use some of the existing hardcover to offset some of the new stuff in other places. So that will help, alleviate some of those issues. And then we did discuss real briefly with some of the private utility owners to let them know that we have a project that we're looking at here, and we'll really work on that to a greater degree with 75% design to look at these utility impacts and meet with those utility owners and kind of go through some of those things that will be a significant impact to the project, whether it's option 1 or 2. All right. So kind of the final part of this is really the project cost and some of the comparisons we did with options 1 and 2. And the mayor alluded to that. Next slide. How about, I'm sorry, go to the previous slide. There we go. Alluded to that there's not a huge cost difference, and we're still talking about a lot of dollars at $500,000, but not a significant difference in the two options there. As you noted from the review of the maps, you could see that there were only 2 kind of primary areas where we were able to narrow that roadway for a significant distance with option 2. And so that's where we're seeing some of the cost reduction is the smaller impact with those pavements, a little less stormwater management. We were able to reduce some of the wetland impacts and so forth. We do have some estimates of wetland impacts included with these costs as well. And so you can see some of those differences between the 2 options. And so, it does add up between the 2. Next slide. And then Administrator Martins did kind of allude to some of the funding potentials to the project. Obviously, City of Medina and Corcoran, this is a state aid route as well. So there's that possibility. Some of the potential cost sharing components could be with Hennepin County, maybe Plymouth or Maple Grove, and that's something that we'll really have to look at more closely as we get further along in the process here. Obviously, the developments that were discussed, and then I just want to make a note here too that formal assessments to single-family residential properties here are not anticipated at this time. So essentially the next steps and some of the recommendations here as well. So with that, Kevin Matz had alluded to some of the recommendation here with option 2 being the preferred alternative, primarily because of the reduction in cost due to the smaller amounts of pavements. There's less wetland impacts, less volume for stormwater management, less right-of-way and so forth. And we'd like to note too that even though option 2 does not have that center turn lane in some locations, it really does provide a very similar amount of improvement in traffic operations. And of course, the safety improvements will be very similar with the major intersections there and so forth. And so there really isn't a difference in that component between the 2 options. And then just wanted to note here, if the council wants to proceed with the up to 75% design, we'd be looking at refining the costs, analyzing these funding mechanisms more clearly so that we can identify exactly what those dollar amounts might be, define better where that trail might go, and that could have a great effect on because of the adjacent development that's occurring in some of those locations. And then really come to a point with 75%, we'd be looking at the entire corridor at that time, and then really finalize this plan for the entire corridor that staff can use with their planning efforts to facilitate some of those things with the developments and so forth. Beyond that point, cities may want to consider moving into final design and even construction for phase 1 or other phases too. So we're not quite at that point. But the next step is really to get into that 75% design aspect of it. Next slide. So just a little bit of a kind of a rough schedule here too. So tonight, obviously, we're looking at this here with you folks, and then next week I'll be presenting this to the City of Medina Council, and then for the council to consider selecting one of these preferred options and move into 75% design. We'd finish that design here in the next couple of months, and at that point, then we'll bring it back to council and again kind of go through some of the changes or some of the additional things that we discovered or we actually be able to solve at that point. And then looking further ahead, if council does decide to proceed with phase 1, finalizing those construction plans and then potential construction in 2021. So with that, I guess, really just kind of leave it up for any remaining questions you might have on this, and comments I that you might have, and even things you might want me to bring to the next council meeting with Medina as you see fit. So thank you for having me.
Mr. Mayor, just want to jump in. I got a text from Councilmember Bottom. He had to drop off. He said everything's okay, but it sounds like he's off for the remainder of the meeting. So I just wanted to share that.
Oh, okay. Any questions, comments, discussion?
Yeah, I'll go first if nobody else wants to. Being a resident that lives on Hackamore Road and I drive Hackamore every day, I kind of have a sense of what's going on the road. Can you tell me an option? Can you tell me the width of the pavement surface of the road currently, and what it's proposed in phase 2, or option 2, with regards to phase 1?
Yeah, so the existing pavement width, if I'll just kind of recall from my memory here, it's probably in that 24 to 28 feet wide, kind of depending on where you're at. Some of the rural sections get a little bit narrow there. You get a little bit further to the east towards 116, it gets a little bit wider with that existing urban section there. It's kind of more like 28 feet wide. So if we're talking the two options there, generally those would be 12-foot driving lanes. The center lane could be 11 feet. So that's 33 plus the shoulders. So we're getting to a fairly wide roadway, which would be, just over 40 feet wide there if you include the shoulders as well. That wouldn't include the trail and so forth. So it's a fairly significant amount of widening. You're looking at, say, a 24 to 28, going to 40 to 44 foot width, kind of depending on where you're at there.
Yeah.
Plus the trail. So as you can imagine, those power poles and things will get impacted regardless of the options. And then, adding the trail onto that too further widens.
Yeah, my concern is the way the topography of the road. When you're headed west on Hackamore, and you come onto the Hunter Road area, you're inclining to what is it, Bergama, Steeplechase, that intersection. You're actually inclining before you start going down, and currently there's a lot of people that obviously use that road to walk and bike on and whatnot, and so you can't see over the road to know if you can go around. Now the trail is going to alleviate some of that, but there's a lot of bikers that use that road, and those bikers do not use the trail. They stay on the road. So in my mind, if we can keep phase 1 as wide as possible, we're going to have the best benefit as far as public safety goes, because there's a lot of areas where you just can't see until you crest the hill. Now I understand the hill at 101 is going to be shaved down, and that hill is really dangerous currently. So I think the proposal was something like a 2 to 3 foot shave. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
So, I don't know what the additional cost is of shaving that even lower. I'm sure it adds more slope to the side, to the north side of the road, but that intersection is really, really dangerous in the morning when you have low sunlight, a stoplight, icy roads. There's high potential for accident. In fact, I'm 100% certain of accident because I was rear-ended there myself, waiting at a stoplight one sunny morning on an icy day. So, and coming eastbound or westbound is the same way. You crest that hill and you can't see until you get to the top, and there's usually somebody there. So whatever we can do to make phase 1 the most safe, I'm all for it. So if that means putting in a center lane the whole way on phase 1, I don't see the need for a center lane on. Well, phase 2 is essentially the same between options 1 and 2, from what I can tell, as far as roadway surface goes. There might be a little bit difference in the trail. And phase phase 3, there's a difference, but phase 3 is relatively flat and wide. And I don't think you'd have as much traffic in phase 3 as you would in phase 1. So in my mind, I have no problem with phase 2 and 3 staying at option 2. I think, but phase 1, I think, would be better suited for option 1. And having more boulevard between the road and the trail, I don't know how we're going to maintain trails in the future, but I just know plowing snow, the closer that trail is to the road, the more difficult we are going to have if we do decide to plow it in the future. So that's something to think about for council. And those are really my only questions right now.
Councilmember Schultz, I can maybe just respond to the geometrics that you're talking about of the vertical curves there and shaving those down. That's certainly something we can look at, and I'll make a note of that. And especially some of the other curves. Now, we did essentially go through each of the curves. We did a profile and we checked them versus what would be required for state aid design. This is a state aid route, so we do want to try to maintain that design level as much as possible. So there was really only one deficient curve, which is the one you alluded to, closer to 101. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at shaving off some of the curves to a greater degree, or other ones in the corridor too. So I did make that note.
Okay, yeah, I think the curve closest to 101 is probably the one that would have the most impact of any kind. Thank you. Do you have any sense of, if you did shave it, how much additional costs that would deal with landscaping on the north side of the road, what that would impact?
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be too bad. Now, it might depend on how the plan for the church comes about. You know, if the church would allow us to grade up into that property and, you know, take out some trees and some of those things, that might not be that costly, but we had to acquire some right away, or even have a retaining wall there to avoid some of those grading issues. That's where we might see some of the costs increase quickly if we continue to shave that roadway down.
Yeah.
So I think it is kind of opportune that the church did come in, and so that might give us opportunity to work with them and look at that and see what is the most efficient and least costly way to make that work.
Jim and Councilmember Schultz, I can just add real quick to that. With some foreshadowing, I don't think that's going to be an issue. That's the connection point for their entry, and I think they're looking at lowering that too for their current site plan. So I think that will coincide very nicely, and we can continue to see, you know, maximize the improvement we can there and take advantage.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
My thoughts on it were similar to yours, Mr. Mayor, as far as the penny wise, pound foolish kind of concept. I think of 101 going south from 30 right now, and I so wish that had just been expanded all the way. And so, you know, it's going to be one of those problems in that area. I just don't want to see that happen in this too, when we can, for $500,000, it's going to be a lot more expensive if we have to do it down the line. However, I mean, according to Jim, he's saying that it doesn't impact traffic flow much from one option to the next. I don't know. I mean, I need to trust the experts on this, but it just logically to me, it makes sense for $500,000 to do what we can do. As for the trails, I kind of feel like there's an expense there toward the city of Corcoran, but there's also a benefit. One of the main goals that we have in this city is to add those trails. And so from my perspective, I am completely okay with having that cost in addition to the benefit that's going to come from it, especially with all the new residents that will be, or likely to be, on that north side. It makes a lot of sense for that to be on the north side. So I guess for me, I wouldn't make much of an issue about it. I'd be happy that we have the trails. Other than that, I have no comments.
Okay. Thanks, Brian.
I don't, this is Tom, I don't have too much to add. You guys have taken all my thunder. The first option has, I think, a nicer trail, and I want to give that lots of credit. Being penny wise to squeeze it down and pound foolishly as traffic increases, I think is right. It certainly is a difference in cost. I would like to be really responsible with the money, but man, you make something that you hate the whole time you own it. It's like buying a pair of pants that don't quite fit. You know, they might be on sale, but if they don't work, it's just a bad deal. So I feel that both these designs are very responsible, but I would like something that we'll all be really happy with for the next 30 years.
Yeah, I think, Tom, I think you echo, I echo you entirely on that. The message I want to send is that if there is a long-term advantage, we shouldn't shut the door on it to go with option one. But it's and part of the message we're sending, I'm sure Medina will be looking at what our discussion is about here, and I would message to them as well that we're not. I don't think we're messaging to them we want the cheapest option no matter what, and that's a message. That's what I want. That's how I feel about it. So
yeah.
Anyway, any other questions, observations?
Mr. Mayor, so I think just as far as a motion goes, you certainly could make the recommended motion recommending or moving forward with option 2, but then also provide by consensus, Jim can kind of tell the side story of it if the council is okay with operating that method, unless somebody really wants to go with option 1 and make that motion. I just thought it's kind of a gray area.
Yeah, it's hard to codify it. So yeah, I guess let's do exactly that. Why don't we move ahead with approving the recommended option, which is option 2, to move ahead with a 75% completion, and then let's do that first, and we can come back and see if we have a consensus on leaving the door open for option 1, if that seems to make sense in the future, to have it brought back to us for future consideration. So I'll entertain a motion to direct staff to move forward with option 2 to the 75% completion, design completion stage.
I guess I'm uncomfortable with how that's worded. Maybe I don't know that I'm ready to endorse option 1. I think what we're saying, or option 2, I think what we're saying is we're open to both options, and it'll depend on what we get with more information. At least that's what I've heard. So if we were to say, if we officially recommend option 2, I think that's kind of misleading to the city of Medina, or yeah, to the city of Medina.
Well, I think, isn't that a little bit of the point, is that it's not cast in concrete, whatever action we take here. We need to give staff and Medina direction as far as where we're willing to go. If somebody wants to make a different motion, that kind of, I don't know what this absolutely is needed here.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, why is it needed that we choose one or the other? I think the feedback is pretty clear as far as we want to make the best choice.
Okay.
And either of those are open.
Well, let's check with staff and find out then if Brian, if we staff, if we recommend moving ahead with the 70 to the 75%, that we authorize staff to take the next step to try and get to the 75% design phase, and then come back after more information is available and tell us which way they want to go. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I'll just jump in. Jim, can you maybe confirm? I think the contract with WSB talks about designing one option. So really, if we're going to move forward and design 2 options, that's out of scope a little bit. So I think that's the reason where, again, we're designing to 75%, but we're not approving construction plans. It's just we would ideally complete the design of this roadway at some point. Now, when the construction actually takes place, it could be final review, and maybe we should amend this plan and add this like we talked about back in 2020. But I think we do need to give them something to design to, or we need to buck up with some extra cost to probably design both. Jim, is that fair?
I'd say that's a fair assessment. Yep.
Okay, so So right now, we need to either say we're going to move option 1 or option 2. If we're not prepared to do that, we need to ask for what we need to have in order to make that decision.
And the other thing I would say is then you're basically putting Medina in the driver's seat with their selection too.
Sure.
Oh, a question with regards to that. If we so choose option 1 and Medina chooses option 2, where do we sit at that point?
I was going to ask that earlier, but yeah.
We were hoping we wouldn't have to have that conversation at the staff level.
Well, right now, since we're first in line, we're just making our recommendation, and we just have to respond if Medina comes back differently. But the operating point for us right now is, do we need more information to decide between option 1 and option 2? And or do we say that we can't decide and we need to see both designs completed, in which case we're recommending spending more money?
Can I ask a question? What if we move forward with a design approach for, let's say, option 1, and it's ultimately decided option 2 is, Medina goes with option 2, and we come back to the table with Medina and agree to option 2, or if Medina says let's go with option 1 then 2, and ultimately we both come back and say now option 2 is a better fit. How much cross engineering is in there where we're not, a change between the two designs, we're not losing, what was wasted money? Does that make sense?
Not to me. I'm hoping it does. Maybe for Jim or Kevin.
I can try to answer that. I think I think part of the goal when we laid out this method, and it's always challenging when you're dealing with a road on a corridor with as many options as we have, which with newer development and existing homes, it's just really challenging. So we tried to kind of devise a plan to try to kind of I guess funnel key questions, knowing that we would have some bigger ones left unanswered. So really this is, to answer your question, is the more times we change it as we get further along, there is more engineering costs. So the short answer is the more we tweak it later, there's more cost. My advice is you want to get the end product the best. So at each point in the process, sharing your input, saying what you want, there's always options to add or subtract stuff before the design project. There's methods in the process. It depends on where we are at the stage. If we have a cooperative agreement with Medina, it gets harder. We'd have to amend that. We don't have that at this point. So the goal would be to try to come to some sort of consensus with some direction that we could bring back and kind of focus our energies. Because at 75, we want to come back with impacts. A lot of the residents, we heard them loud and clear. There's issues that they want addressed, and they were, the primary feedback from them was, why aren't you answering this now? and just because in each scenario, it might change a little bit. We can answer it in general, but we can't answer it as specifically. So I guess I don't know if that helped you or not,
Well,
but
yeah, okay. To me, staff has gone and done a good job of giving us two options here. They've made a recommendation of what they think it is. As far as I'm concerned, I have no information to drive me to say that I disagree with their decision. And I also, behind that, I'm getting a clear message that we're not going down one road that we can't make any changes in the future. I'm going to strongly support, if council doesn't want to, they don't want to, but I'm going to support recommending that they move ahead with a 75% completion for option 2 as they recommend.
Now, weighing in on that, it looks to me as though option 2 would give us a lot more the larger option would, if you had to design for 1, you'd get all the answers you need for option 2 while you're doing option 1. Is that not accurate? It seems like the first option is wider. It's got a lot more information. If you're going to design for one or the other and then pull back, wouldn't it make sense to do option 1, and then if you need to retract it to option 2, you do that? But if we only need to pay for 1, wouldn't you do the one that requires more, that gets you more information, I guess is my point.
Yeah, you're accurate. The option 1 would provide, I guess I'll say, a worst case scenario in terms of cost and impact, if you're comparing the two. So that is, I would agree with your statement. Jim, this might be helpful if I may offer. Jim, can you just real quickly speak to the two differences in the design, because they are very, very similar. So if you can highlight the two areas that they're different real quickly, and then I could speak to, I guess I can probably do it now. Just I'll provide some context on how the recommendation came about between these two. And it, you know, there's a lot of debate in the room, and it really came down to cost, as in a general sense, was a factor. We're hearing you loud and clear. What was there enough value added by adding that 500,000 of projected, you know, additional cost to get? Was there enough benefit to gain? That was part of the conversation. And then another part of the conversation that I think holds some merit, that we maybe haven't touched on today, is a lot of the existing property owners, at least near the Hackamore Circle area, in both Corcoran and Medina, and Jim, please correct me if I'm misspeaking here, were really not in favor of turn lanes or widening of the road. So kind of with all of that packaged together, the recommendation at a staff level came back and said, well, maybe the ultimate design in 25 years is option one. The current residents are providing feedback, at least in that specific area where there is an option, that they don't want it. So that did play into the recommendation, as I observe it and bring that back to you from the meeting. So Jim, I will let you correct me if I'm misspeaking at all, but maybe that's helpful for you guys to factor in your decision.
Kevin, I believe that is a fair assessment of what input we did have at the virtual open house and some of the comments that were on the social pinpoint site. If we want to just move up the slides a little bit to some of those maps, I can maybe just point out a few things that might help out that. One more, go one more. Okay, so looking at, go down one, sorry. Okay, so looking at this one, just kind of compare, this is one spot where there is more of a significant difference between the two options. If we're looking at the bottom one, I do want to point out that we did put the taper on the bottom side of the roadway purposefully. So if you look at the top option, you'll see kind of the purple hatching on the bottom. You know, that's where we have wetland impacts. And so on option 2 below, the way that we transitioned that roadway, we actually were to avoid almost all of the wetland impacts, or, you know, a fairly significant amount of them, which is a few exceptions of a little bit on the corner there, which we might be able to alleviate if we even further transition that taper further to the west, and then on the east side again, kind of on that corner. So if you compare it that way, we do have potential wetland, fewer wetland impacts with option 2, and that might come into play too with our permitting and sequencing. You know, having an option where we can minimize wetland impacts will look favorably when we do go for permitting for these impacts with the DNR and the Corps and all the other agencies that are involved in the review, because they will ask, you know, did you look at other options for you know, minimizing impacts? And this would come up, and we'd, you know, be able to say that yes, we did look at an option, and this, you know, option 2, we were able to avoid those impacts by 80%. So that's a good, I think that's a good scenario here in this particular location. Now, if you want to flip up a couple
Jim,
slides.
Excuse me, Jim,
yeah.
do you mind if I add one thing off of this? So the other thing, the other difference between these two designs is there's, you know, basically between steeplechase and the exit to the, you know, the future church site, if that moves forward. The real benefit of turn lanes is access. And based on what we know now, there will not be another access due to wetlands, due to on both sides of the road, due to the developments already on both sides of the road and covenants and whatnot. So we know between Steeplechase and Bergamont and that access, the exit access, I'll call it, the western access that you see just west of that BMP4, there will be no other street. We cannot envision any other street accesses there. So there's the chances of that ever needing a turn lane are slim to none. So that's really a big difference there. So really we're building that full middle turn lane there for no future reason at all. Now, when we flip to this next one that Jim's going to touch on, there's Hackamore Circle. There's some areas that, you know, smaller residential areas, I'll call them, they're larger lots, but they could redevelop into something in the future. And there could be turn lanes there in the future. So that when we jump to this next one, that, you know, just I want to point out that this one's unlikely to ever expand. That one could expand, but that's in the area where they don't want the expansion. So that's what as staff we're trying to balance on a recommendation. So thanks, Jim. I'll let you continue.
Sure. So yeah, like Kevin alluded to, why don't we just click up to a couple of slides up and we'll look at other area. One more. Yeah. So down one. Okay. So on the east part of this, you'll start to see that we're, you know, with the options 1 above and 2 below, you'll start to see that we're transitioning to a narrow roadway there. In this area, as we transition to the east, we are getting into some of those single family residential homes. And why don't you click down one slide? And on the left-hand side, you know, you can see that we're really avoiding some of those impacts to a greater extent. You know, there was some concerns about, you know, there's a number of nice trees there that are kind of those black circles, and what kind of impacts are we going to see there, and so forth. And so there might be ways to better alleviate some of those impacts with a narrower roadway section, especially kind of in this corridor where we do have some more of the single family homes.
This is Alan. I agree with you. In phase 2 and phase 3, there's not much difference between options 1 and 2 that have significant impact. But phase 1, I understand there won't be any turn lanes, and having that center portion, it's just going to sit there. But what it does, from what I've seen, is it'll drive the traffic. It'll be further separation from cars coming down the road. So if you do have somebody on the side of the road and you have to swerve, you don't have to be fearful of swerving into oncoming traffic. You can swerve into that lane. And I see that a lot. That road is used by bikers, and, you know, well, right now there's currently walkers because there's no place to walk, but the biking, we constantly get bikers, large groups of bikers on that road in the summertime. So to me, if you could do phase one and option 1 and the rest of it in phase 2, I'd be totally fine with that. Option 2, sorry.
Kevin and Jim, do you want to weigh in on that idea of having option 2 for phase 1 and option 1 for phase 2 and 3?
Oh, the opposite, sorry.
Okay.
Option 1 for phase 1.
Yeah, Jim Stremmel here. Well, I guess the benefit of this particular plan is that you can kind of intermix things, I guess, if you did want to see that, and that, you know, goes along with the trail and I guess the roadway corridor itself. So that is certainly a possibility, especially as these developments do occur and we do kind of refine the access points. Might be easier to make some of those decisions too, especially with phase 2 and 3.
Jim, I'll just jump in. I think at the staff level, we would need Medina would clearly ask why, and that's, you know, kind of a feeling statement. People could swerve into the center lane. I think we probably need to work on finding some justification for that at the staff level, I think.
Well, I could
challenge.
I'd suggest Medina look at their police log records, because they patrol that road pretty heavy. That's where 90% of their income probably comes from the department. They're on that road constantly, so they see what's going up and down that road from that point over. And with the church there, and with increased homes coming out of Ravinia, in my mind, that's, if you're going to spend more dollars on that road, that's where you'd spend it.
Okay, why don't we move forward with a motion? I think you've probably articulated something there, Alan. If you want to make a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to move forward with 75% of option 2 with a suggestion that we would be supportive of option 1 in phase 1. Is that clear enough, or is that too vague?
I think we'd prefer to have option 1 in phase 1. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Who seconded it, Brian?
Anderson, second.
Anderson, second. Okay. Any further discussion? I think it makes sense. I think, you know, we don't have to be locked in. We can express our opinion, and Medina can come back to us and give us, you know, their side of it. And I think as far as articulating why you want it, I think to me, you did, Alan. I don't know if that stands up or not from a practical standpoint, but they can come back and defend it or attack it.
Yeah, it leaves it open for discussion. So
exactly. Yeah. Yep. So, okay. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Gajewski,
Aye.
and Schultz.
aye.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council.
Thank you,
Thank
staff,
you.
and,
Thank you,
Jim
staff.
for a great
Thank you,
job.
Jim.
Yeah, thank you. This is really helpful.
Okay, now we're going to move on to new business. So there's an opportunity for public comment. The new business will be the 2020 fee schedule amendments. So anyone who would like to comment on that publicly, press *9, and Jessica will put you on. Anyone wanting to make public comment, press *9 at this time.
Mayor, it does not look like anyone has raised their hand at this time, and we do have 3 callers on.
Okay, so let's move on to item 10A, which is the 2020 fee schedule amendments. I think you're muted, Brad.
Sorry. Just got a couple brief slides here, but looking for an amendment to the fee schedule for a couple of reasons here. The first is for the city planner position, which we're going to be proceeding forward with. Similar to Kevin, we want to establish a fee for charging towards applications escrow when we review plans that come in. So we're recommending a $65 an hour rate for that city planner to charge for their services. In addition to the packet, I neglected to throw in the park dedication fee that we're going to already have on the agenda. So I'm recommending also adding the park dedication fees as talked about early, adjusting single family to $4,428 and multifamily to $3,141. Next slide. And then the other fees are really related to adjustments to our trunk fees for water and sewer. The most significant thing is we're actually breaking out water for Northeast District and Southeast District. And that's specific because in the Southeast District, we have plenty of capacity to continue with Maple Grove water for the foreseeable future with some investment. And with Northeast, we do not. So we did Kevin and his team did a significant update of the overall project cost for that district divided by the acreage and coming up with a new fee. So there's a small tweak to water in Southeast from 6246 to 6270. And then there's a big change or a new change for the trunk fee in the Northeast District. And I just try to show this out that 16,300 sounds like a crazy big number. However, if we do no longer have the Maple Grove fees, that's more in line. So right now, for example, that second bullet under the second item there, say we had the 6,200 in Southeast, we still have to have the per unit Maple Grove fee that they pass through us. So that's 3 of them at about $2,600. So if they're actually paying closer to $14,000 per acre in the Southeast currently, whereas if we have our own system, it'll be $16,300 because we won't have to pass that on. So it's within the realm of everything. And then finally, an update with the sewer trunk line availability charge. And this is a big change because we now have factored in a giant north-south pipe that would actually connect City Hall area and further south to actually go to northeast. So it's a big infrastructure addition that was really, I was going to say fleshed out, I almost said flushed, in the 2040 comp plan, and we have a new plan with that. So recommending those fee updates. The next slides are just images from, this is the sewer district plan, and the second slide is the water district plan, separating the districts there. So with that, looking to have the council approve those amendments to the fee schedule by ordinance.
Questions? Any questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve ordinance 2020-407 as presented.
So moved, Anderson.
Alan, you're
Sec-
muted.
Second, Schultz.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Dejewski.
I gotta go nay. I just can't, that 16-3 just is, I can't swallow it.
Okay, Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, item 11A, which is a pandemic response update.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The most recent update are from the state is that we're just probably over about 29,000 cases now in Minnesota. So far as a city, our expenses are holding steady. We're now into the new phase as we anticipated that we're managing staff exposures and officers have been exposed to COVID in the community. So kind of working on what that looks like as far as monitoring, testing, and potential for quarantine if necessary. But also helping the community, as you know, we've had businesses and also a church reach out just to discuss what opening plans look like and just really to seek advice, and we're trying to be supportive in whatever way we can to help the community as they're seeking out answers to questions. We've also been working internally on really developing what our next phases look like as we look at potentials for loosening restrictions on public hours for City Hall and other community impacts that the pandemic's having. So I can turn it over to Brad to fill in any blanks that he might have and then take any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, phase 3 obviously began this week. So as Matt said, we've been working with different property owners. Actually, I was with Christy at the stanchion a couple hours before the meeting tonight, and I did send a letter allowing her to essentially have some temporary expanded outdoor space if she meets some conditions. So she's planning on opening the stanchion tomorrow, for example. So those are the types of conversations we're having with that. Just regarding operational stuff, we've also reinitiated code enforcement to take place. So the first sweep will be next week, get that moving forward again. We're busier than ever as far as development moving forward. I know at least at the leadership level, it's been working, 6 or more days a week and working long days, and the team is very burnt out. So I'm trying to manage that, and it's probably frustrating to them that I'm encouraging them to take time off and then asking them to do more stuff in the same breath typically. So, but they're managing as best they can. Jessica informed me that the plexiglass was actually installed, I think today or yesterday, at the front counter, so that's great. We are waiting for the stanchions to come in to help guide people in City Hall. So I am asking tonight actually to have the council authorize the closure of City Hall through June 26th so we can finalize our plans. We also are now required to have a opening plan essentially adopted by the council by June 29th. So at the June 25th meeting, we'll be presenting our opening plan essentially, which Matt alluded to. It might be 2 days a week, 3 days a week. We're finalizing those details, but we need a little extra time to have those conversations because there's just too much going on. So that's my question for the council tonight, to really get that authority to continue the closure through the 26th. And I can answer questions too.
Any questions?
No.
Don't have a question, but just say that you guys are doing an amazing job. It's pretty inspirational. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great, thanks. So you need a motion from us to authorize the extension of City Hall closure till June 26th.
Yeah, I was saying through June 26th, which is the day after the next council meeting.
Okay.
And again, that evening we'll be presenting an opening plan for adoption.
Yeah. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to do that.
So moved, Schultz.
Second, Anderson.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Dejewski. Anybody here, Brian?
I saw his lips move. No.
Okay. And Schultz.
Aye.
I got bad ears, but I think I would have heard him say something, but he's quiet tonight, Brian. Okay, the next item 12 is the 2020 City Council schedule.
Mr. Mayor and Council, this was your easy meeting for the month. A lot of planning items, including Tavera. So when the packet goes out, I'll encourage you to talk to Kendra. I'll probably actually have her give you a call, each of you as well, because it's a planning heavy meeting. You can watch the Planning Commission meeting that adjourned at 12:46 a.m. I believe that might be helpful for you. But it's just a busy meeting. We also have a declaration of a vacancy on the City Council to discuss at that meeting as well. So a lot of stuff and some changes too. That's all.
Okay.
I'd encourage you to watch not the full planning commission meeting, but there was two big items on there that got a lot of public comment. One that got a lot of public comment on it. It's worth looking at.
Okay.
So are we doing ourselves an injustice here by having city council closed for that? Are we just limiting public comment?
No, I think it's the best possible option because with phase 3, I think we're limited to people at City Hall. If anything, we would have to do both because in my mind, someone who is in quarantine should have a voice too. And the way we're set up is actually either in person all at once or all electronic. It functions the best. We don't really know how to have a hybrid meeting at this point. And further, even looking at City Hall, my guess is if we had the council here, we could probably get 10 people in the community room. I actually think the hearing went quite well. The public hearing for Tavera, for example, didn't start until, I want to say, after 11. So people hung on the call for 4 hours just to get a chance to speak. And I was ready to get just berated by everyone of how long it's taken. No one said a word. They just participated and had their input. And I actually think, I was very worried, Councilor Dejewski, and I actually think it was probably a better form of government where anyone can participate how they want. We're going to talk internally about allowing everyone to be on video instead of the phone because people are figuring out Zoom, and so half of them were on video even though we didn't give the video out, and that kind of feels hard for people. So we're going to have that specific conversation, but I actually think we need to have it electronically to make sure we have the most input.
I think we had good public comment on well, there was 3 items on there, but only 2 where we had public input. My only suggestion, and I think the planning commission got a little off track, is they had a open public comment and then they closed the comment and then somebody raised their hand and they took comment thereafter, and that wasn't constructive to the meeting. So my suggestion is make sure we hold open comment and listen to everybody and give plenty of time for that, but then once public comments closed, we stay closed.
We'll do that. Okay, good. Good points. I think those all need to be discussed because the challenge is, and we want to make darn sure that everybody feels like they've been given an opportunity to give their input on this. And as always, people are free to contact us individually as well. And I certainly encourage it, and I'm sure the rest of the council does too. It's pretty rare for that to happen, just from a practical standpoint, but we need to have the welcome mat out for it. Okay, anything else? Brad, anything else?
No, I got a text actually from Jessica saying that phase 3 is only 10 people, so it'd be even worse than what I said earlier.
Okay. So. Okay. Any other items from staff? Anything from council? Again, I thank everybody for a good meeting, all the staff and the council members and support. Good job. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, Schultz.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Thomas, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Dejewski.
Aye.
Aye. Wait, Bottom-up, aye.
Bottom is back, and Schultz.
Aye.
You're out of alphabetic sequence, though, John. So
Sorry
we'll
about
still,
that.
we'll still count your vote. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you,
Good
everybody.
meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Aye.